It's a new year at the Redacted Culture Cast, and if you are watching on YouTube, you see that we have a new set of candles. And while we tend to delve into the subjects of the gun culture or philosophy or what drives us, there is a point that I want to start with. In my life, as short as it is, and as short as it is, and as little and as much as that I've seen, there seems to be a disparity between the amount of people that I've seen lost to something like combat and that of being taken away by ideas. The global war on terror, like many other wars, oftentimes gets designated or identified with a certain type of injury, and the Vietnam War was an interesting war when it comes to this description because it was torn between two ideas. You had on the one hand this idea of being drafted and the moral injury, and then there was kind of the mechanism of war, whether it was Agent Orange, the introduction of chemicals that were many of them were around even in World War I, but you had this sort of disparity between the harsh violence of the conflict and then the moral conflict that the characters or the individuals who experience it had to endure. But that has more than completely shifted in one direction for the global war on terror, where PTSD and TBI are those two sides, those two kind of paired coins. Now, if you've dug into what little or as much that the VA has tried to answer with this question, or if you've been around for a while, you've heard the term PTSD in this language appear time and time and time again. But today's episode is really on a tool for defeating one form of moral injury or addressing a concern that comes up often, which is that idea of the conspiracy theory. In fact, the idea of conspiracy theory is so ambiguous in our society that it ranges from being considered nothing other than a psyop by some sort of agency, or it is the truth, the real truth, that is compelling me to do the things that we do. The unfortunate events of the last weekend involving Sean Ryan and the large kind of discourse on the events that took place in Nevada with the Cybertruck that blew up in the supposed VBID has brought this to front and center. And as much as time was spent trying to decipher what could or did or would have happened, what we are kind of left with is that feeling of emptiness and the concern about being consumed by not necessarily the idea of a conspiracy theory, but by conspiracy theories themselves, is that you are given a intense sense of conviction and participation in something that you have no real skin in the game with, only to be left empty with the bag in hand. I want to start this, and I'm trying to present this from a not necessarily a sense of compassion, but a sense of concern, where the danger that I see about what we call conspiracy theory, and it might be worth a book in itself, is not so much that it's a term that's used to kind of dissuade the masses from seeking after what is right and true and good, but rather it's a false prophet or a false belief, or this kind of like this idea that captures somebody and consumes them. Having known multiple people who are consumed by a conspiracy theory only to be left destitute afterwards, I think it is my responsibility to bring this to you. And that being my responsibility, I hope that you will stay tuned to listen to what I have to say about warding oneself against conspiracy theories, not in the idea of defending oneself against what the government may or may not be lying to you about, or what some sort of shadowy organization might be involved in, but rather how we can look at these worldview grasping ideas and condense them into something that we can work with and identify common patterns that serve as the trap. That they serve as this sort of snake-tongued bait to get you invested, but ultimately lead to nothing other than a sense of loss or time wasted. So, If you are still staying tuned, this episode is a part of gun culture. You know that we are sponsored now if you've been listening for some time, but we are sponsored by Obsidian Arms, and Obsidian Arms presents a multitude of opportunities for you if whether you're looking to get into competition shooting, whether you're trying to build out a certain piece of kit to make it work out better. They address a lot of the concerns that exist within the gun industry or the gun culture, whether it is equipment for improving your performance, or it is something like self-sufficiency with their toolkits that come with a lifetime warranty, or if you have an idea that you are trying to bring to market, that you're looking for a in-house manufacturer to make it so that you can bring it into the industry. We're just around the corner for SHOT Show, which means I doubt many of us are going to be submitting ideas right now, but if you reach out to them at obsidianarms@obsidianarms.com, leave a comment, let them know that we sent you, and if you are able to take your idea and bring it to life, we're just all going to be happy for you there. There's this model that I like to use, and it's a sort of tool for trying to understand the argument that's made in some sort of conspiracy theory or some sort of idea where there are players involved outside of ourselves, possibly a cabal or whatever. And it's a model that I like to use that if I can too easily fit an idea into this paradigm, this example, then I start to look at it with more suspicion. We might look for red flags with an idea, something that is very compelling, but it doesn't ultimately lead to sort of fruit. The reason why I would even want to address this again goes back to the introduction on how I've seen more people suffer from ideological injuries or not intellectual, but like a suffering of not like an existential crisis than I have people experiencing some sort of grave physical wounds. It doesn't mean that those physical wounds don't exist, but with the amount of warfare that we've seen in the way that conflict and even conflict outside of the framework of warfare has continued to perpetuate, the types of injuries that I observe in people are either psychological or in this case, religious, moral, fundamental, metaphysics level inflictions on what they think to be right and true and good. And if I can paint it in a picture, let me give you a tool. Let me give you this idea of the Straw Lord, the Straw Lord Fallacy of its sorts. Those of you who have studied philosophy, especially the fallacies, might see a simple resemblance here, but stay tuned, you'll see where I'm going with it. Now, the Straw Lord Fallacy is a metaphysics level fallacy. It's this idea of framing the world into different camps, sort of not ad infinitum, but like from the assumption. And it divides all of humanity and all the world that we understand into three different groups. See, you've got the population on the base, and they exist at the base of the foundation of the tower. This is the Straw Tower or the Straw Lord series, or fallacy. Kind of like, we're going to draw from Lord of the Rings, you'll see the point. And so at the base of the tower, or at the base of this worldview, is you have the normies, the normal people who go about their daily lives trying to figure out who they are and what they're doing and how to pay the bills and how to carry on in life. They are trying to build their families, raise their children, pay for groceries, get a promotion at work. It's this sort of almost matrix level basic person. Now, the reason why that is set in that stage is it's subtly derogatory, but we have to build into that next, because those people in this worldview, in this mental model, this Straw Lord model, are under the control of whatever the big bad guy is. So you have people going about in their daily lives, not knowing that their worlds, their activities, their successes and failures are ultimately being manipulated by somebody. In the most caricatured example, the people at the top of the tower are some sort of either human or near superhuman individuals, oftentimes depicted in dystopian novels, whether it's 1984 with Big Brother, or it's kind of the leader in Brave New World. You can see this in other novels, like even to some extent Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, where you have the people trying to go about their daily bread, trying to go about their daily lives, but they don't know that the things that they're interacting with and the truths that they're engaging with are ultimately being manipulated by somebody. And somebody is at the top, and they might be invisible, or they might be shrouded or protected from the advances, attacks, or address of the people at the bottom. Now, the people at the bottom are, again, trying to go about their lives, but they're ultimately being controlled by these individuals at the top who, whether they view themselves as or just de facto by their position in some sort of fictional economy and fictional government, have control. Again, you could bring up movies. The Matrix is a good example where the AI is kind of controlling people, or you have Equilibrium with the people at the top kind of picking and choosing who wins and who loses, and then what is acceptable and unacceptable in society. Again, this is very common literature in the 1900s, especially the second half of the 1900s. But there's a problem here, because let's just say that somebody from the normie group, the NPC group, the casual entertainers or the casual participants, is able to see that their world is not as it should be, that there's something wrong, not just with the power structure, but with its correlation to truth. And they start understanding, or they come to realize, that there's some evil cabal at the top, some sort of dark leadership. Let's just call them the Sith, or the one, a Sauron at the top. There's some sort of bad guy at the top that's manipulating society to control everybody. If somebody has the intellectual capacity to break from the normies, to break away from the herd, and observe this structure for what it is, are they not considered different, even better than the normal person? I mean, if you have a bunch of society, let's call them sheep in the language of Grossman, who are going about their daily lives, eating their grass and, growing their pelt and doing whatever they're doing. And one of them decides to wake up, become enlightened, and they separate themselves from the herd because they can see what's going on. They can kind of accept the rejection of the normies, but they're still in contrast or in competition with whatever the evil overlord is. See, the Straw Lord theory depends on the existence of some sort of cabal. Call them the Illuminati, call them the Freemasons, call them the globalists, call them whatever you want to, but the fundamental structure is that we have three different types or three different elements of mankind. You have the normies, you've got the evil overlords, the controllers of this world, and then you have the enlightened ones. We could even break it into a Star Wars reference. You've got the normal people of the galaxy. You've got the Sith that are manipulating everybody for their own good, their own benefit. But then opposing the Sith are the Jedi. Now, this is where this idea becomes nefarious. It's not that the idea itself is innocent, but the specific nefarious, even self-serving approach or issue with this worldview is that if you view the world as the normal people are controlled by the evil people at the top, and then we are separate from them, the bigger and the more powerful and the more elusive and the more invisible the bad guy are, the more powerful the observer must have to be. Ultimately, it's a worldview that sort of fluffs up themselves without doing it directly. It's an indirect version of boasting about one's intellectual and, say, moral prowess. The problem with the Straw Lord theory is, in a sort of dirty phrase, is it's a form of moral masturbation. See, all that's required for you to be the Jedi, all that's required for an individual to become enlightened is to, quote, see the world as it is, and to understand that there's a power dynamic between those who have power and those who don't. You'll see this reflected in worldviews like Marxism or communism or even some forms of socialism. You'll see it in worldviews and ideologies that involve the oppressors and the oppressed. You see this in the way some even religious institutions view the world, as those who have power are doing so and using that power against the will and opposed to the right order of things, and that we the enlightened who see that there's a disparity here are opposing it. The dangerous drug, the invitation into this worldview is this idea that you get to be a part of the resistance. But what does that mean? How do you determine, because there are examples in our world that we can observe where there are powerful people manipulating the population below them for their own gain and for their own ends, and many of those ends being in their own sense immoral. But what is the problem with this straw lord theory when it comes to the morality of the so-called enlightened ones? You see this often, that the only thing that you need to do to be part of the resistance is to believe in the idea of the worldview. See, the worst, most compelling elements of what we call a conspiracy theory is that it realigns itself, or it presents itself as an idea of how the world is currently structured, but underneath that is a fundamental religious ideology. It's this religious ideology that all you need to do is believe that there is an evil power structure, and therefore you are part of the good people. The 1619 Project is a political example of how this might come to pass, but there are other examples throughout history where individuals have presented themselves as bastions of integrity and bastions of, say, freedom or liberty or even righteousness without having any compulsion to the individual. See, all you need to do, again, to be enlightened is to believe. You don't have to believe in any moral framework, only that there are oppressors and oppressed, and somehow you are excluded to that by your divine sense of vision. So we bring this up again, and I'm going to use some recent context with the example of what took place on the Sean Ryan show last week, where an individual came onto the show and was talking about what could be the case when it came to the Las Vegas Cybertruck explosion, the VBID. And the thing that you could see catch on to the two, and I think there's some room for grace here with both of them, both Sean and Sam, is that there was this idea about how there might be something so much bigger involved going on, and it caught them and it sunk their claws into them, and they were carried on through the 2 hours of the show. The biggest temptation of a conspiracy theory is to present yourself not as a participant in the solution, but as a hero without any need to participate, or as a hero without any part that requires you to act. It doesn't mean that you need to change the way that you live your life. It just means that you need to commit yourself to some sort of idea that has enveloped itself in somehow you being at the center of the solution. It's completely contradictory to religious writing, whether it's Christian or similar, where what we are in need of is a savior, but it's also completely in contradiction to what we generally believe to be right and true and good when it comes to the responsibilities of the individual. See, it's not good enough for me to want the best for my family. It's not good enough for me to desire that my family is fed, especially when I'm in an environment where I'm capable of doing that. It's not good enough to say that there are oppressors that are preventing me from doing so. My responsibility as a man is to take care of my family. It's to build into my friends. It's to encourage them into better living, not just convincing them into seeing this sort of substructure or this, well, it's not even a substructure, this foundation of reality that is making them enlightened like me. Now, there have been philosophers, writers, intellectuals, gun culture people who have talked about how the Enlightenment wasn't everything it chalked up to be. This idea of enlightenment, whether it's Western with this commitment to reason, or Eastern, with its commitment to Gnosticism in its own thing, some sort of hidden truth, both of those attempts at enlightenment tend to come with a very dark temptation attached, that you could somehow achieve some sort of intelligence, or what's the word on the East? Like, not enlightenment, but not selflessness. There's a word that they keep using where it's sort of like transcendence beyond the normal, and that you could transcend from the world of the normies to the world of the Jedi if only you hold these truths to be self-evident in a very twisted way. It's not what things are true about the world. It's not what things are true about reality, what is or is not true, what is or is not the foundation. In fact, it's a mockery of this study of metaphysics by condensing it into just simply human structures. Human, what is the, what's the dragging point that gets so often used? Reducing moral truth and metaphysics into merely a perception of social constructs. That all of reality is just a series of social constructs. Congratulations, you've been duped into postmodernism. If you are able to be convinced, if you are not able, because because conspiracy theories are things that grab onto people instead of them just being, things that float around in the ether. I think conspiracy theories in their worst frames, in these sort of straw lord examples, are things that grab onto people because they find them in their moment of crisis. They latch their claws into them and say, I can give you a sense of meaning so long as you are part of the resistance. And ultimately, it leaves them empty because the fundamental principle of a conspiracy theory is that you can do nothing about it but spread awareness. Imagine if you had somebody in a situation where you understood what was going on, but the only thing that was required was your understanding, not your action. See, you can know the truth, but you can't act upon it. This is the fundamental lie, the fundamental twist that grabs onto people. And this exists within what I think is the framework of gun culture, but it's also the framework of the society we live in now, because it's not that conspiracy theories themselves are tools wielded by evil people to manipulate those into some sort of passive subservience, but rather in an age that feels nothing short of meaninglessness, in an age that feels nothing short of meaningless for many people, a single glimmer or glimpse of a world where they get to serve something greater than themselves appeals to them with a gravitas that is difficult to resist. And like I began in the beginning, I have seen more people casualties of these intellectual or ideological concerns where they are strangled almost. I've watched people go from being stable, normal, or even surviving individuals to these catastrophic spiralings into madness, not in the interesting painter sense, but in the tragic, not manipulated, but like almost cultish sense. It's not the right word, as if they've been captured by some sort of idea that they can neither complete in order to move on from, nor can they turn away from it. It's this duality, as if they know they believe that they must see something to its intellectual conclusion, but they also can't step away from it if that intellectual conclusion is nothing short of a pile of contradictions. So if this is one tool, one single element that helps you step away from or look at a a tempting worldview and say, all right, does it involve this structure? Does it involve, the normies being controlled by the evil lord, with the moral masturbation of, if I separate myself from the normies but don't join the evil, I must be good, and the height of my good is paired to the power of the evil, hence why so many of these quote-unquote conspiracy theories paint the invisible, unmentionable, unlabelable bad guy as something so massive. Because the bigger the bad guy, the more moral the hero is the trap. The bigger the bad guy, the bigger the manipulator, the more wise the person who sees through it is the temptation. Because that's how this structure works. It's that if you can paint the normies being controlled by some near ultimate evil bad guy, then by simply acknowledging and understanding that framework, it falsely elevates the so-called enlightened to a morally equivalent but opposing example of the bad guy. The bigger the bad guy, the bigger the hero. The bigger the evil, the bigger your good is, simply for acknowledging it, or at least that's the temptation. And that is the warning sign. It's not that there aren't events in our lifetimes where conspiracies take place, where evil people work with evil people behind the scenes to make things happen. But the solution to those is not reorienting the world into this. It's not reorienting one's worldview into this idea of the evil manipulators, the normies, and then you, the enlightened, but rather identifying who did what, where, and then bringing that issue, not necessarily to light, but to solution. How does that get solved? Is there a court process? Is there a judicial process? Is there a moral solution to the problem? If the only thing that this worldview demands of you is your belief in it, no action, then, as it is said in the New Testament, faith without works is dead. And in the same way, if your actions are on shoddy ground and that their only end is to glorify yourself, then works without faith in your frame is dead. So, in conclusion, as we go on to the next week and to the early months of January as we prepare for SHOT Show, this episode of the Redacted Culture Cast has been a little bit more abstract, but I thank you for listening in. If you want to engage in more subjects within gun culture, whether it's EDC, gun, firearms related, not necessarily reviews in sort of the grand thumb sense, but more of a microcosm look at different pieces, then stay tuned. I look forward to hearing from you below. But if you would do me a favor, leave a comment below on your favorite conspiracy theory that is just oh so too easy or too difficult to see through. Maybe we'll start a discussion and maybe we'll get somewhere from there. So, if this has been beneficial to you, leave a like below. We are growing steadily, and I look forward to hearing from you soon. Now go forth and conquer.